proposed changes for the CC&Rs, which everybody gets a chance to vote on. We're missing one of our board members, but we'll go ahead and get started. We expect him to be here, but he's usually fighting traffic getting back from his job this time of day, so hopefully he'll join us later. Let me just start with just some introductions in case people don't know everybody who's up here. I'm Tony Faconis. I'm currently the president of the SOA Association. To my right's Danielle Kirby, who's a vice president. Dave Hughes, who's a vice president. Ray Lee, who I think most of you know, he's our treasurer for the association. Did I miss anything? Curtis Chan is the one who's not here, but hopefully he will join us. So anyway, let me start off again by saying what we really want to focus on tonight are the proposed changes of the CCRs, and the format that we'll use is similar to previous meetings. What I want to do is take a few minutes up front, maybe 20-30 minutes, to go through and explain what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do that, and then we'll turn it over to questions for hopefully about an hour or so. Or I'll stay here as long as anybody wants to stay here, so we can, I won't make that pledge for everybody else. Okay, that was just me speaking, so we'll see how that goes. But we'll take as many questions as we can. What we would like to do, though, is make sure everybody has a chance to get their questions in. So what we'll ask, similar to what we did at Candidates Night, if everybody who wants to ask a question, if you would, we'll make arrangements, and Melissa will pass the microphone around, or if we can make a line, or however you want to do that. But if everybody could ask one question, then let everybody else have a chance to ask a question. And then once everybody who's asked the question has had that opportunity, if somebody has a second question or whatever, we can just keep going around as long as we have time, and as long as you want to stay here. But I think it's only fair for everybody to limit one question at a time and give everybody an opportunity to ask their question, and then keep going in cycles until everybody's talked out. So if that's okay, that would be the format. What I would like to do before we get started is just turn this over to Melissa for a couple of minutes. As everybody I'm sure knows, there was a unfortunate mix-up with the way the mailing house that sent out the ballots, so the instructions got confused, and Melissa will just for a couple minutes just say exactly what's going on with that and how we're dealing with that.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so I am glad to say that we are getting ballots in. We had probably 20 ballots that came in today alone, so everyone is receiving them. They are following the instructions. So just to clarify what the instructions are, there were 2 ballots in your mailer package. One was on blue paper, and that's the CC&R proposed changes, and then one on yellow, which is for the Board of Directors election. So within there...
Can you use the microphone, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Within... Does it work? Okay. Wow. So the yellow ballot's for the Board of Directors, and then enclosed in there were 2 white small ballot envelopes. They either said ballot or secret ballot. On one of them, printed in the top corner, was CC&R vote. So you want to make sure to put the blue proposed changes ballot in the CC&R white envelope. You can fold it however you would like to fit in that envelope, but it'll go in there. And then take the yellow Board of Directors and place it in the other small white envelope. Both of those can go inside the return envelope that was provided, and that way that has your Somerset account number, so we can verify the validity of those ballots, and then we will separate them accordingly so they can be counted at the appropriate time. Should you choose to submit your votes separately, if you want to go ahead and vote for the Board of Directors first and then submit your CC&R vote later on, you can do that. We just ask that you, again, enclose your smaller ballot envelope in a larger white envelope and mail that to us with your address, and we can verify the account based on the address. If you have any questions, not sure, you can come track myself down, Lauren and Sean, who are also in the back. If you don't know who they are, come find us. We will help you. Call us. We're available.
I have a question.
Melissa?
Yes. I have a question because on the yellow paper for the ballot, the instructions were to put it in a window envelope, which we did not get, and say the cover letter to go with it, which we did not get that cover letter.
So disregard the instructions on the ballot and the instructions that were included on the annual notice, and just go with the instructions that either you received in the mail today or tomorrow, and that were also emailed out. Go with those. The content, as far as who is running for the board, selecting the board candidates, as well as the ballot for the CC&Rs, content is still the same, just the instructions were wrong.
Okay.
Another question. You said that, I might be wrong, that to verify the validity of the vote, you have our names and addresses. In other words, what you're saying is there is no secret voting?
We have to verify that an account is current and that they have the ability to vote. Once
So the question is there is no secret voting?
No, so let me explain. So once we receive the outer envelope, we verify it. If it's verified that it's a valid vote, we take the secret ballot out of that outer envelope, and then therefore there is no tie to the owner for that ballot.
But you already see that whoever voted is.
We would know that you as an owner voted. How you voted, we do not know.
Okay. So we can see that.
Correct.
Except in the exception that you just mentioned, should someone decide to vote for the CC&R first, and then the candidates later in separate submissions, how are you going to ensure?
That each ballot needs to go in the separate, smaller envelopes.
Correct. But there's no covering outer envelope to ensure the validity of that ballot cast.
The return envelope that was in the mailer if you put those two smaller white envelopes in the larger return envelope,
That's not my question.
Yeah, his question is if you send them in separately.
You allow a separation of two
Yes.
submissions. Under those circumstances, how do you ensure that the one with the candidate's vote, which has got no signature, no nothing on the yellow sheet, is a valid vote?
when they come in,
When they're separate now.
no, I know, but when a ballot comes in, so the CC&R vote, on the ballot, it'll have the CC&R vote. Staff, so management staff, we have a binder where we have to track as votes come in. So once we mark that you've submitted your CC&R vote, another CC&R vote for your property cannot be received.
You still missed my question.
No, let me try and
Not-
answer that. If you're gonna vote,
Maybe you can try.
if you're gonna vote separately,
Correctly.
Okay.
That's what Melissa offered, okay?
you only have one return envelope.
Exactly.
The instructions that will come out in the mail, as well as on the website, is if you're gonna have a separate vote on the CC&Rs, you provide a separate envelope, stick this into that separate envelope. So that, again, they can verify that you are a member of
It's
the
the other board I'm concerned
Well,
about.
excuse me, if I can finish with that. And I believe the instructions say, in your first envelope, there's a number up here, SOME with a number. You need to copy that on to your second envelope. That's how they tell who
That's
does
the
what.
answer.
That's,
Thank you.
yeah. So just write that on
Thank you.
your separate
My
envelope.
concern is when you split up, the ballot,
Right.
which are the candidates, has got
Right.
no identification
Right.
validating whether it's
Yeah.
valid.
Right.
Right. So as long as, yeah,
If you submit both at the same time,
I
there's no
understand, I
issue.
understand that. I'm chasing
But
after
if you split it, if you
the
split
offer
it,
that Melissa just did.
Right.
So let's think
just
through
supply
that.
your own outer envelope and make sure you write that number on it. That's what tracks
Thank
it.
you.
Also, be aware though, there are different deadlines.
Understand.
So, if you can send me the candidate ballot first, and take more time for the other, but if you do it the other way, your candidate ballot won't count.
Understand.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question. We are a senior group. Some of us are more senior than seniors. My question is, to help some of the seniors, would you consider having a box here where the seniors can drop it in and perhaps you can pick it up?
And
I don't agree with Dr. Foster. There's no control.
I'm asking you, I'm not asking you.
I know, but that's my
As a management,
opinion.
she has to answer.
Okay.
It actually was discussed and decided by the association and the election committee last year that that would not be something that the association would do because of the lack of control.
That's right.
So that way it's gathered.
If it's all going to be valid,
I would be happy to talk to you at the end of the meeting, so that way the board can get started on the CC&R vote. But at this time, ballots do need to be returned to our on-site office of the Public Town Center.
There's a, I believe, a 5-member election oversight committee. They determine the rules in terms of how it's returned. So if you want to be involved in the changes of that process, volunteer.
Was there any reason why you didn't put 2 return envelopes in, seeing how there's 2 ballots at 2 different dates? Why didn't you just put 2 in?
If that's really the issue, then we're in pretty good shape.
Let's move ahead with our discussion of the CCR changes. What I'd like to do is start by just going through the CC&R changes. And if you've gotten your ballots and looked at them, you know that there are 2 documents there, actually. The first one was a letter from the board explaining what we're asking for, what these actually do, why we're asking for these changes right now. And the second document was the actual text of the changes. So we can go through both of those quickly and then open it up to questions. I would like to address a couple of points, though, right off the bat before we get into the details of each of these changes. Not surprisingly, as soon as we posted that we want to ask you to vote on some changes, lots of rumors and information started flying around. There's 2 pieces that keep coming to my attention, people keep bringing up to me that I'd like to just address right off the bat, okay? One is apparently a lot of people seem to have been told that if you pass the CCRs, it means assessments will increase. Okay, that is absolutely not true. There's no real tie between the CCRs and the change of the CCRs and how assessments are set or anything else. In fact, you could say that if you pass the CCRs, it makes it more restrictive on this and future boards on what they can do about assessments and what you get to vote on. But there is absolutely no increase in assessments that will happen just because you pass the CC&Rs. You still have and will have the right to vote on the budgets. The other thing, one of the things that we have in here is you've heard lots of people, including a candidate tonight, say, gee, we think it's really important that homeowners get to vote on important issues. But I've never heard anybody define what an important issue is and how you're going to decide whether it's important to vote on the electric bill we have to pay or building a new building. One of the changes we're asking for actually makes that clear and is more restrictive. It will require homeowner votes on more issues than are currently required either in our CC&Rs or in NRS 116, the governing statute in Nevada. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. The other rumor that came back to me that people brought to my attention, apparently is going around, is that the reason for the CC&R changes and the purpose of asking for CC&R changes is somehow to avoid a homeowner vote if we reach a deal for some kind of arrangement with the golf club. And that is also absolutely not true. The 2 are unrelated. Quite frankly, regardless of whether the CC&Rs pass or not. If we're able to work out what we think is a good deal for the association to replace the existing deal with the golf course, there will be a homeowner vote on it. So it doesn't really matter whether these CC&Rs pass or not. There will be a vote on them. Okay? So those are two things I just wanted to address right up front. And what I'll do is I'll start with this, and I'll ask my colleagues, and this is Curtis Chan, who told you he was coming, and he's now here. So thanks for coming, Curtis. We know that's difficult this time of day. But what I'll do is I'll start and kind of go down this letter that we've included and talk about the key points before we open it up for question. I'll just ask my colleagues to jump in at any time if they want to add to what I'm saying or emphasize something or what. The first thing I think that it's important to talk about is why are we even asking for changes to the CC&Rs? Okay, and the reason for that is in the course of the association's business this year, it became clear at various times that our CC&Rs, in fact, were not clear on what the board's authority was. And there were different interpretations of what powers we had as a board or what powers we didn't have as a board. And one thing it's important to understand, I think this is where the source of the ambiguity came from, is that under Nevada law, when the developer is still involved with the board, he has certain powers to do things that don't automatically transfer to the homeowner board. The law recognizes the developer as the person who put in the work to create any development. This is not just for Somerset, this is anywhere in Nevada. That they have certain privileges that don't automatically carry over. And when we looked at our CC&Rs in the light of several issues that have come up this year, it became clear that the way the CCRs were written specifically related to the non-developer board, which we are the first one, were not clear. So what we're really trying to do with these CC&Rs is clarify and eliminate the ambiguity of what authority the board has or doesn't have. Okay? For example, and all of these changes really relate to the board's authority to either acquire, purchase, lease, or annex property, land. Okay? The developer clearly has that authority. In fact, one interpretation of our CC&Rs, this board and all future boards also have that authority with the approval of the developer. But we don't think the developer should have a finger in the Somerset pie anymore. The developer's gone, he should stay gone. And so that's one of the reasons for these changes, to make sure that we can actually deal with the business. And when I say we, it's not just this board, but it's all future boards. And that's an important point. We're not making these changes for something short-term that we want to do right now. This is actually changes that will apply to Somerset from here on out until the next time CC&Rs are changed, if they ever are, okay, for these points. So that's one thing. These are really clarifications. It's also pretty clear that these kinds of powers, which are typically vested in boards in Nevada, are important to Somerset. From the survey we did recently, it's clear that, most residents seem to recognize that Somerset is a growing community, whether you live in Sierra Canyon or whether you live in the other part of Somerset. We do have some separate facilities, we do have some shared facilities. We can have more shared facilities or less, whatever the people want going forward. But it's pretty clear that many residents recognize that Somerset needs to grow as the community grows, or the quality of life with whatever amenities we have in either side of Somerset here is going to get worse. Okay, and at some point you're going to need that power to be able to somehow acquire more space, whether it's for exercise rooms or swimming pools or whatever it is that anybody wants, walking trails, you want to add a putting green to the Canyon 9, which everybody in Somerset can use, that's going to take land. And if we want to build the community garden that's been talked about for West Park, people say, let's put up a dog park. We may need to get some land on the periphery, and in order to make it an amenity that everybody can use, we need to be able to bring it into the association as common element. Okay, so that's kind of looking out forward. Right now, there's no specific plan for anything. There's a couple of examples that I think illustrate why we want this kind of authority, why we think the future boards need this kind of authority. The other thing that we're trying to do, which has not been done before, is actually set standards for when you do require a homeowner vote and when you don't, because that obviously is an issue that's come up many times at board meetings. The truth is that under Nevada law, there's really only a handful of very specific situations that truly require a homeowner vote. Okay? Having an election and ratifying the budget requires a homeowner vote. Okay? Getting agreement to put in an amenity, even though we all may think that should go to a homeowner, doesn't actually require it. Okay? And so in that sense, what we're proposing is some specific changes that we hope strike a good balance between allowing the board a certain amount of leeway to do the business they need to do and to hold to their fiduciary responsibility as required under Nevada law, but also make sure that for things that can really affect the community in a big way financially or over a long time frame, actually do go to a homeowner vote. And so in that sense, when we talk about the specifics, it is actually more restrictive than what's required by law right now. And our CC&Rs are silent on these things. So anyway, let's talk about some of the, let me do there were a couple of examples in here, and I know that some people, at least I've heard some questions already raised about why are these in here and what's somebody planning. Okay, nobody's planning anything right now, but one of the things that we've gotten the board and Melissa periodically get lots of comments on is town square looks terrible. There's 60% of the light bulbs on the houses, on the buildings down there are burnt out. There's 3 here, 2 there. When you drive by, it looks like it's derelict. We got cars with for sale signs. We got RVs parked down there. We've got big signs hanging around that don't necessarily always look like they're in keeping with the style of Somerset. Well, it turns out, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but it turns out Town Center actually does have a set of their own CC&Rs. Okay, Town Center actually does pay certain dues to the association. Their CC&Rs, just like the Somerset CC&Rs for all the residents, actually deal with things like standards for landscaping and maintenance and redoing the parking lot when it gets too, the gravel gets all torn up or the asphalt gets torn up. The problem is we can't enforce those right now. For a long time, it was because all the property was owned by a bank, and the bank wouldn't cooperate with anything. But even though now all the different parcels, there are 5 parcels there, they're all separately owned, they're privately owned, it really requires the agreement of certain number of owners. Now, and I know I've seen one posting online that said, oh, you need 3 out of the 5 parcels. Because there's an example here, if we could buy that little lot, which the previous board and this board have tried to buy. Okay, the 3 to 5 parcels is wrong. That's incorrect. If you read the CC&Rs, it's based on having the votes to control a certain percentage of the land that's in Town Center. Right now, our parcel, the Somerset parcel, which is where the clubhouse is just under that limit. So if we actually bought the lot next door, we, the SOA, would have the ability to enforce the rules. And what does that mean? Well, that means we can make sure that they change the light bulbs when the light bulbs are burnt out. We can enforce rules on signage. We could tow cars if people leave cars there for a week with for sale signs or boats or stuff like that. Right now, we can't do anything about any of that stuff. So that's, that's an example of why we want to have the ability to purchase land. For example, pardon? Yeah, I mean, now it's because of the ambiguity. And this is also a good example of why we're doing this, because certainly the last board thought they had the authority, and in fact they did, because the developer was on the last board. This board, and pretty much everybody who attended board, thought that this board also had the authority. Again, we do if we got the developer's permission. But that's why we want to change these things to clarify, because we don't think it's appropriate for the developer to still have his finger in things and be able to tell us when we want to vote on something or not, or when we want to buy something. I think that's probably enough on the example stuff. Let's go straight to the specific changes, and then we'll try to get to the questions as soon as we can. Okay. There are basically, if you look at the actual text of the changes, there are 4 changes, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. And the comments in the letter, the 1, 2, 3, 4 in the explanatory letter, match the 1, 2, 3, 4 in the text of the changes. And that's why you need to kind of have them both together. The first one, what's the purpose of the first change? And that's the, unless people want me to, I wasn't planning on reading each one of these. Is that okay? Okay. If anybody is confused about it or decides they need to hear exactly what the words are, just let me know and I'll read it. But the first one, and does everybody have a copy of these, by the way? Or we do have some extras here. If you don't have one, okay. Ask Melissa, and if we don't have enough, maybe people can share, whatever. But what you've got in that package, you'll see the first couple pages, and I think they're double-sided, but the first couple pages is the letter. And then the back half of it are the actual proposed changes. You'll see the heading is proposed changes to the CC&R. Okay, so what does the first one do? The first one basically answers the question of what kind of a vote do we need on issues like this when we put them to a homeowner vote. Okay, so if there is a homeowner vote with regard to buying property, or even you deal with a golf club, whatever comes up, what kind of vote is needed to pass it? And if you read NRS and if you read our CC&Rs, you find that there are several different votes for different purposes. Okay, our CC&Rs are very clear on the votes it takes to change CC&Rs. They're also very clear on the votes it takes to elect a board. Okay, they are not clear. They don't say anything about the votes it takes to do something like this. Okay, so that's the first one. And what it's basically saying is that if we put issues like this regarding the purchase, lease, annexation of land, if they are such that they need to go to a homeowner vote, what you need in order to pass it is the majority of votes cast, as long as the total number of votes is at least a quorum of members. Now, quorum of members is 51% of all the voting units in Somerset. Okay, so right now it's 2,478 units are paying dues. That's what we mean by units is who has to pay assessments, because there's a lot of, for example, builder lots. If they're not paying assessment, they're not counted. So we have to get 51% of that number total vote cast, so 1,200 plus votes cast, and then whatever the majority of those votes say, that determines the issue. The important thing about this is you've got to have that quorum, because if you have, let's say you had 1,000 votes cast, which is not a quorum, okay, it's below the limit for quorum. It doesn't matter if you had 999 of those votes in favor and 1 vote against. The fact that we didn't reach a quorum of votes means it does not pass. Okay, and so that's what the first change is defining. What does it take to pass a homeowner vote on issues of this type, which aren't specifically addressed in our CC&Rs right now? Okay?
You have new questions later? Or
I hope to do them later. We can get them all at once, but if that's okay. I was going to move on to the second one. Does anybody have anything to say about the first one? Or? Okay. Okay, what the second change is focused on is limiting the board's authority to purchase or lease or annex land. It sets a clear standard for when a homeowner vote is required. So it avoids all the language of vote on important issues or expensive issues or whatever. It takes that quantitative language out and it says, let's set a standard. Okay, and this standard was arrived at by consensus of this board, trying to strike a balance between, we are running a pretty big organization, and we're headed toward annual budgets. Once this place is built out, we're going to be on the order of $7.5 million. So what we're saying in here is that what the board of directors can do by their own vote at meetings. So this doesn't eliminate any of the current requirements for open meetings and giving notice and allowing people to speak about it and the board's making their decision publicly in front of you. None of that changes. What this says, though, is that first one, for the acquisition or purchase of real property, if we want to buy a chunk of land adjacent to Somerset because we need to expand or whatever, okay, the board can act up to a fair market value of $500,000 as long as they can pay for it either within the current assessments or by not increasing current assessments more than the board already has authority to do. So none of the rules about what the board can do about assessments, how assessments are set, the need for budgets, the need for identifying what you're spending money on, none of that changes. All it basically says is if the value is less than $500,000 and it can be accommodated within current assessments such that no homeowner vote on assessments is required, the board can do it. They still have to disclose it. They still have to make the decision publicly. All those rules still apply. It just says that doesn't need a homeowner vote. So what it says as well is that if the value of the property is greater than $500,000, or if in order to pay for it, the board has to raise assessments outside of their statutory authority right now, which I believe is, it's nothing we've ever approached. But by our CC&Rs in Nevada law, boards can raise assessments. I believe it's up to 15%. So if a board had to exceed that to pay for it, it automatically has to have a homeowner's vote. Or if it's more than $500,000, it has to have a homeowner's vote. Okay, that's what that change is. Now, what about, and how do we decide to vote? Well, that's the part we just talked about. So it would be 51, or a majority vote as long as there's a quorum of votes cast. Okay. For leasing real property, the leasing kind of works the same. Is basically if the hold on, let me just make sure I'm thinking the right way about this. Okay, for a lease, it's basically, since the lease doesn't have a price in the same sense that buying something that does, then the lease basically, it's the payment issue. If it can be paid for without increasing assessments greater than the board already has the authority to do, the board can do it. If you have to increase assessments by that amount, there has to be a homeowner vote. It also deals with the issue of a mortgage or some kind of lien. If you want to finance the acquisition of something with a lien, it comes out the same way. Basically, if the value is greater than $500,000, it's got to have a homeowner vote. Okay, so we're using that, and like I said, the idea of the $500,000 was just a consensus decision by the board, trying to balance what's a reasonable number in today's world and looking forward, as Somerset continues to grow versus the total size of the budget. But recognize again, it is actually more restrictive than current CC&Rs require. So, do you want to?
Yeah. I echo Tony's comments in that we don't foresee an increase in assessments. And in fact, it's unlikely that assessments will go up in the, I'm going to call it the medium term, which means over the next couple of years, because Somerset is a growing community. Now, our budget today is roughly $4.8 million in total. Yes, it will increase as additional units come on board, so to speak, within the Somerset community itself. But in terms of common assessments, I really don't see that common assessment increasing at all over this short-term, medium-term period of time because of the growth in the number of units. Now, Tony talked in one of his examples about acquiring the piece of property adjacent to TCTC. Okay. Does that affect the common assessments or the assessments that all Sierra Canyon residents contribute into? The answer is no, because that would be, we have within the budget for Somerset, we have actually 3 separate cost centers. We have a cost center for common area and Canyon 9, which is, the assessment on that is $82 a month. That was the rate this year. That's going to be the rate next year. It actually decreased, I'm going to say 2 years ago, from that, I think it was $84 back then. Okay. So if there's a land acquired adjacent for the adjacent lot next to TCTC, that actually goes against the TCTC budget itself or cost center. Let's call it the non-Sierra Canyon residents of Somerset contribute into that cost center. So if there's any increase involved, which again I don't anticipate since I'm the treasurer for the entire Somerset Association, I don't anticipate an increase for the acquisition of that adjacent lot within the town center adjacent area. So I don't foresee an increase either in the common area nor in TCTC. Now, I mentioned that we had 3 separate cost centers within our Somerset budget, homeowners association budget. The third one is for private streets. That is, those are generally homes behind the gated areas within Somerset, although we do have a few homes that are outside of the gates that are still private streets. That's because in the development of Somerset, I guess the developer reached the agreement with the city that the homeowner association, through this group of homeowners, would maintain and be responsible for maintaining the streets within Somerset, within their section of Somerset, I should say. And they then pay a separate assessment for that component. For Sierra Canyon residents, there's 2 components for monthly assessments. One is to the Somerset master or common area assessment. The other one is for the Sierra Canyon assessment. For someone within Somerset itself, let's say outside of Sierra Canyon, they pay the common area assessment. They pay a TCTC assessment, called the town center assessment. And if they live on a private street, they pay a third assessment for private streets. Now, there are a couple of sub-associations as well, besides Sierra Canyon, within Somerset itself. You have the View, you also have the Village. They, on top, pay another assessment. So they're actually paying, there's 4 components to their monthly assessments. And they actually pay the highest assessments throughout the community. I'm going to turn it down.
Okay, so we just talked about annexation, and I'll just point out, so I'm not trying to skip over anything. If you look at the text, there is a provision for adjusting the limits by CPI changes every 5 years, just to keep up with the future, basically. And that brings us to number 4, which we'll go through quickly, and then we can open it up for questions. There are 2 parts to number 4, and again, what we're doing is making things a bit more restrictive than they are now. Okay, what the change for section 16 says is that if the board wants to acquire or lease property and can't pay for it within the limits that we've already talked about, okay, so I think everybody knows boards do have the authority to levy special assessments. What this change says is all special assessments for this purpose have to go to a homeowner vote. That is not required either by law or by our CC&Rs now, but we felt that that's a prudent thing to protect homeowners. So any special assessment for the purpose of acquiring, purchasing, leasing land or property has to go to a homeowner vote, period. Okay. The final one is also to clear up a issue that our current CCRs are silent on. Okay, as I think everybody knows, obviously when the board does and the finance committee puts together the annual budget and you know, that gets voted on and ratified and all that kind of stuff, you know that obviously the budget covers operations, and it covers maintenance, and it covers reserves. Okay, what it is silent on is whether we're allowed to save money for future things. And so obviously, you know, if we're looking at our community increasing by 50%, and I know you guys, you know, by total build out or something like that, and I know in Sierra Canyon you have issues with your recreational center here, how that's sized. We're starting to have those same issues at the clubhouse as well. You know, sooner or later, we're probably going to need to build something, okay, to expand. In fact, prior to the issues that came up from a complaint that was filed with the Ombudsman, we were actually very close to building a common use between Sierra Canyon and the rest of Somerset for pickleball, for example. We were pretty close to getting to the point where we were going to build that or have that as 2013 amenity under the current deal with the golf course. That unfortunately has been put on hold now. But that's an example of how we can have common facilities. Canyon 9 is a common facility. There's nothing that says in the future that if, you know, everybody jointly decides we need something that we don't have right now, there's nothing that says it has to be either Sierra Canyon or the other part of Somerset. There's nothing that says we can't build something together if that's what we all choose to do. Okay? But what our CC&Rs are silent on is, can we save money in anticipation of that? And if you can't save money, obviously then the issue does become more than likely a special assessment, because you go from not having any money to having to build a $2 million building or whatever it is that we decide to do. So what we're putting in, the change to section 17, is basically that assessment money, or some portion of it, money collected, can be put into a capital improvement type fund. Okay, it's subject to all the same rules we talked about. We can't put, you know, we can't raise assessments or, you know, do all that kind of stuff. All the same limits apply. But this just allows the association to actually establish a capital improvement fund so we can collect funds over 5 years, 10 years, whatever the planning time frame is. So that when we get to the point that we want to build something, it's not a big disruptive thing to homeowners. You're not going to get a notice asking for a special assessment or anything like that. So that's the point of item 17. Now, it was pretty quick going through these, but I've asked if my colleagues have anything they want to add, or we can just go to questions and answers. Okay. How are we going to do this, Melissa? You want to? We only have the one microphone. We could probably pass it around.
We can just, I mean, if it's all right with you guys, just start and go down each aisle.
That's fine with me.
Why don't we do this, because I think we can talk loud enough, but I know it's a lot harder sometimes to hear when somebody in front of you is talking away from you. So if we use the microphone for people asking questions. And if you have any trouble hearing, just raise your hand and we'll fix that.
Since you're in the front row.
Oh, no, I pass for now.
Okay, so, question?
Sure.
Yeah, you got a question.
I would like to hear from the board why you want a mandate of $500,000 for property lease, purchase, annexation, and so on. I heard what you just said, but we can understand why a developer control board would deal heavily with real estate purchases, leases, and so on. After all, that's its main line of business. Please explain why a homeowners control board wants such wide latitude on real estate dealings forever hereafter with escalation built in. $500,000 with provisions for inflation. And how do you figure out at $500,000? I recall during the developer control board, the piece of land north of TCTC is a piece of land which is of prime interest to the SOA. And in your own words, you say this is a strategic piece of land. And I can empathize with that. Now, again, if my memory serves me, the board failed to acquire that because they underbid that piece of land, which went for around $220,000. So, in reality, a piece of land of such value to the board, to the SOA, I would say tops at $250,000. So it is a stretch to try to have a mandate for $500,000 when the reality of the pieces that the SOA has been dealing with is in the league of $250,000. So can you explain how you five members come to the $500,000 mandate, and why do you need to have an escalation built in? After all, it's only a mandate, which is something we should trigger a homeowners board. So why do we have a moving target? So please explain why $500,000. Thank you.
Does anybody want to take a shot or want me to answer? You know, I think the
As I said earlier, it was basically a judgment call by the vote. Okay, I would offer a different take, disagree a little bit with your characterization of the money for the following reasons. Okay, that lot next to TCTC, as you said, 200 some odd rate. Okay, I'm aware of 3 contracts that were put in on that and accepted, and all 3 of them, basically, the buyers backed out. And I'll tell you why. Okay, this kind of gets to the point of that being a prime piece of land. It's very strategic for us, for the SOA. It's not very good for pretty much anybody else. There's a L-shaped easement that runs up that land that runs near the main part of the lot. Kind of, it's not on the edge, it's kind of in the middle. So the truth is, you can't really build much in terms of buildings on that land. And that's what's happened with, like I said, I know of at least 3 buyers that put in an offer. The offer was accepted tentatively, and when they did their due diligence, all 3 of them backed out. Okay, so why is that strategic to us? It's strategic to us for 2 reasons. One is that what that land is good for is parking lot. Because if the owner of the easement wants to come in and dig it up to get to their pipes or whatever's down there, it's not a big deal to fix that. Okay, if you have a building sitting there, they can't dig it up. So why is parking lot a big deal? Well, and this obviously applies to the Somerset side more than Sierra Canyon here, but if we want to expand that building to increase the space in there, because we are having pressures with reaching capacity the same way you guys are having pressures here. In order to get a building permit, we've got to demonstrate more parking, or the city won't give us a building permit. Okay, that's one reason. The second reason, as I said earlier, if we had that land, the SOA controls enough land in town center that the SOA can enforce the CC&Rs for maintenance and landscaping and all those kinds of issues. So for us it's important, but even with that easement, which substantially impairs the land for most buyers, the bank basically on the last go-around, they wouldn't go below 225. That was their counter offer to us, and they held tight to that. The truth is that commercial land is probably, and I'll defer to my realtor colleagues, but from stuff we looked at earlier this year, you're talking $250-ish per acre. Well, if you want to build a building like this, you're going to need a couple of acres, at least. And then when you put in parking and stuff, so you very quickly, actually, if you're talking about any kind of big facility, you very quickly surpass that $500,000 amount. One of the other rationales that went into that was that homeowner votes take a lot of time. Okay, they're also fairly expensive, but that's neither here nor there. But if you're doing something for a big deal, you're much more likely to have time to do it. There aren't as many buyers out there if you're trying to buy 20 acres or 10 acres or something like that. When you're trying to buy 1 acre or 2 acres, as our experience has already been, every time we put in an offer, another buyer has popped up. So you have to, on some of these deals, you have to be able to act quickly. So just again, in our judgment, given the size of the whole SOA, we didn't think that 500,000 was really that big of a number for the kinds of business that we do, every day. And we thought it was a balance between allowing us to move quickly when there's really a good opportunity of a smaller scale, and we might not be allowed the time. If you wanted to buy an acre of land and it was $300,000, and you go in and say, yeah, but we need 90 days to do a homeowner vote, and somebody's right next to you, even a slightly lower offer, and they're willing to close tomorrow, we're never going to be able to get anything. So that's the rationale. I'm not saying it's scientific. It was a judgment call. Oh yeah, the other thing we thought about with that is the second empty building in town center, not the one with Grape and Grain and Babe Materials, the other one, that one ended up selling for $500,000, give or take. So that kind of sets the upper limit of what we think the board could do or should do without a homeowner vote. But if that building was available, it would be, there's huge uses for the SOA for that, but it's no longer available. But that's kind of part of the rationale. Those are the kinds of things we talked about to come up with those numbers. Okay?
Can I just make a comment?
No, only one question.
You just want
Make a comment. Are you in the?
No.
In order to signal 7 o'clock, we only have half an hour, so if we can.
Yeah, and we'll come back around if we have time. I'll stay after.
Okay.
Okay, you had mentioned that a homeowner vote has to be decided by a quorum. How has it always been? How has it been before that?
Well, there are different requirements for different types of votes. A quorum for the board of directors, for example, to have a meeting and to make a decision is 66%.
All homeowners.
No, of the board,
Oh, the
for
board.
example. A quorum of homeowners for the purpose of sustaining legal action, like the Moana vote. In that case, we needed 50% plus one vote in favor. That's how many positive or yes votes you had to have. There's different standards. The issue of what kind of vote you need for purchasing property is not in our CC&Rs. And that's why we decided that what we thought would be a fair, we're trying to balance the ability for a board to conduct business with protection for the homeowner. And so there's no requirement that we had to do that quorum. So you don't need a quorum to elect a board of directors. You just need a majority, or you need the highest count for however many open slots there are, based on however many people vote. You never get to the point to say, oh, yeah, we had, I got 500 votes and he got 600 votes, but only 1,100 people voted, so we don't have a board. You don't need a quorum for that. So there's all different standards. What we're trying to do is establish a standard for these purposes: the purchase, the lease, the annexation.
So this will only apply to the annexation?
Purchase, lease, acquisition, annexation. The only thing we're changing the CCRs relates to that. If there's an opportunity that the board thinks it makes sense to acquire, purchase, lease, or annex property, that's the only place that these changes apply. We're not changing anything else. But what we are saying, we do think it's worthwhile to say, if it's that big of a deal, okay, if it's more than $500,000, we should have at least a quorum of homeowners vote on it. And then it's the majority rules as long as a quorum was reached. And if we don't get a quorum, then the board should be able to go ahead and make that decision.
I have a related question, but I'll wait till you.
Okay, Joe?
On the quorum, I'm a little confused. I called the offices today to see, and they were unsure. My copy of the CC&Rs appears to default to Nevada revised statutes, which is 20%
yeah.
constitutes a quorum. So well, first, can you tell me where you found that? And second,
for example, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No,
secondly, what?
Second is the board can increase annual assessments up to 15% without a homeowner vote.
Right.
They can have aggregate special assessments in any one year up to 25% without a homeowner vote.
Right.
If you go over that, then you're required to get a majority percentage vote.
Right.
Okay, which we're changing now the definition of what a majority, or at least we're changing the
adding
numbers
the-
of what
yeah,
a majority percentage vote are. So anyway, if we had 2,600
Right.
members right now, as the CC&R stands for these outsized increases and for these approvals, it's 50% plus one. So if you have 2,600 members, it's 1,301 votes.
Well, again,
is what it would take to pass
Right.
something.
Well,
If it's
it depends on
50%.
what it is you're trying to pass. Because,
Okay.
for example, if I've got this right, Article 12, Section 4 of the CCRs, if you have those there,
Go ahead.
that relates to what it takes to amend CCRs.
I'm sorry, could you give me that slide again?
What I have, the reference I have is Article 12, Section 4. That's specifically for amending CC&Rs, and I believe that is, you have to get the vote not less than 51% of eligible votes in the association.
Okay.
So the numbers change depending on what kind of vote.
Well, I'm getting to the vote required for increasing assessments is really what I want to get
Okay,
to.
well, we're not
Okay.
touching that at all.
Well, if you change that, you are changing. If you change it to a quorum from a simple majority of owners, you are changing
the number of votes required to make an outside, I'm not saying whether you're going to or not,
No.
to make an outsized assessment, because that's what the majority percentage vote is in Article 3,
Okay, you're saying
Sections
that-
4 and 5.
Right, okay, I understand your question. Okay. Okay, so I understand what
Well,
you're saying.
the 51%, where does it come from?
That is, we thought that majority should rule, basically.
Well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't state anywhere in here 51%. Article 2, Section 8, quorum and voting, defaults to
Right,
NRS,
but
which is
NR
20% comprises a
Right,
quorum.
Right, but NRS also allows you to modify your CC&Rs for other standards,
Oh.
which is what we're doing.
Well,
Okay,
where is the
again-
51%?
Let me just say again, what we're talking about here is specific to purchasing, acquiring, leasing, annexing land. That's all we're dealing with. Okay, we haven't changed the other parts of the CC&Rs.
Mr. Draconis, I don't see 51% anywhere in these amendments, and I also have not been able to locate it in the existing CC&Rs. So
Well, no, the
quorum is
amendment-
either 20% or it's got to be stated somewhere else in the CC&Rs.
Well, as I said, the 51% is, for example, for changing CC&Rs. The standard we're setting for the purpose of acquiring, purchasing, leasing, annexing land, that standard is with at least a quorum.
20%.
No, okay. With at least a quorum of homeowners, okay? Then you need a majority vote.
Right, 20%, so you need 10% plus 1.
That's right.
He's absolutely correct. The default quorum is 20% unless you define it otherwise.
Yes.
You haven't defined it.
That's right.
Well, okay, let me take, because I know we had that discussion with the attorney, so let me take that question and I will have to get back to you on it.
I'm not trying to be argumentative,
No,
I just want the
understand.
facts.
No, that's fair
Okay.
enough. That's what we're trying to do here.
Do you want to take it behind? Does anyone have a question? Mr. Or is this pass? Mr. Hill, did you have one?
I have a question. I know that the board has put in a lot of effort into coming up with what they believe would be some benefit to the community, but I am also concerned about the members of the community losing control of the expenses, and maybe some future boards misinterpreting the changes that you would solicit from us in this request that you have. I think it's prudent of the board to be soliciting comments and questions from the homeowners so that going forward, the homeowners will be more involved in these changes and they will be more receptive and maybe fully understand them. And instead of just putting out a few pages saying we want to change the CC&Rs to reflect this, this, and this, if there had been a couple of town hall meetings where people could have questioned, if you had said, I think this is what we want to do, let's get your feedback, does this make sense to you, what questions you have, and then come back to us with a vote on something that everybody's participated in, and there wouldn't be so much confusion. I think confusion leads to a lack of voting in a positive way. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Herb James. I want to go back to the quorum issue. The quorum issue is pretty straightforward. It's defined in, I believe it's Article 3, Section 4, that defers the quorum to the NRS 116.3109. And the first subsection is crystal clear. It states 20% of the owners, not 51%, 20%. And that means with 2,474, we're looking at 496 people or owners will make up a quorum, and all we need is 50% of those plus one. Nowhere else in the changes is 51% mentioned, or a majority of 50% plus one mentioned. It refers to this as a majority vote, or a majority percentage vote, quote, and it refers to the quorum, which is 20%. This is a big change because it covers assessments, and it covers $500,000 purchases or leases per year. The question is, are you going to postpone the vote on the CC&R changes until you can get a clarification out on the 20% quorum or a 50% plus one quorum?
Well, let me try to clarify that right now, because I understand the issues coming up. The 51% specifically, you'll see that number. Well, hold on, let me just.
Well, let me clarify that. That's in the back section. You've already addressed it. To change the CC&Rs requires 51%. I'm not talking about 51%.
Yeah, but right now, what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is our CC&Rs right now say that a quorum of homeowners, for the purpose of whatever you need a quorum of homeowners for, is defaults to NRS standard of 20%. Right?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is in our CC&Rs in section 3, I believe it's or Article 3, subsection 6 or 7, it defines that it identifies quorums and it identifies voting. And it states that it defers to the NRS. And the NRS 116-3109 says 20%. And these changes that you're putting forward for us to vote on says that a majority percentage vote will be based on the quorum in the NRS, which is 20%, not 50% or not 51%.
51% relates to adopting the CC&R.
I'm not talking about 51.
No, but I'm saying, I'm clarifying, that's correct, okay?
We're in agreement.
As you said, our current CC, if we don't do anything, okay, if you don't pass these, okay, what is a quorum for the purpose of a vote if we have a homeowner vote on something? It's 20%.
It does not establish it. It says where there is a quorum, where our CC&Rs require a quorum, it refers to the NRS, which is 20%. When our CC&Rs require a quorum, our CC&Rs don't require a quorum. It requires a 51% majority if we change or amend the CC&Rs.
Right, and it requires.
But what you're saying here with these is that if we want to increase assessments, we want to get into a $500,000 or something over a $500,000 lease or purchase, etc., you got to have a quorum, and the quorum is 20%.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, okay, if I understand you correctly and understand that, okay, let's say there are no changes to the CC&Rs, okay? And so let's say that some future board wants to raise the assessments more than 15%. That requires a vote of homeowners by both our CC&Rs under that law, right?
That's correct, but there's not a percentage established, so we assume it's a majority of those people that vote.
If you assume that it's but it does require a quorum, right?
No.
Well, see, that's where we disagree, because just like you have to have a quorum at the annual meeting and so forth. So, but anyway, so.
Okay, the point being is this, the quorum that you guys are using in this change is 20%.
My point is that is at least restrictive and in certain cases more restrictive than what our current rules are. That's what we're trying to say. We've got a requirement in here that if there's a special assessment for the purpose of doing one of these things, you have to have a homeowner vote. Our current CC&R requirement is you only have to have a homeowner vote on special assessments if the special assessment is greater than 25% of the aggregate annual assessments. So you can avoid having a homeowner vote on special assessment altogether. But we're saying, no, for these purposes, you have to have one. So we're trying to make it a little tighter, actually.
Yes, but you're lowering the voting standard from 50%, commonly understood and probably in common law, majority
That's
vote
the assumption. that-
down to, well, it's not established. In our CC&Rs, it's not established. A quorum is not established. What is established in the CC&Rs said, no, what is established is when a quorum is established, you've got to go to the NRS, which says 20%. But when you make a vote on something other than changing the amendments, there's no percentage other than when there's a quorum on the board.
Well,
So
there's
right
a
now, if this
percentage.
passes and you guys want to increase the assessments, or you want to increase the $500,000, all you need is 10% plus 1, as Joe was talking about.
Well, yeah, and we're obviously not gonna convince each other. I would say that the current rules, though, say that if you have a quorum of homeowners at a legitimate meeting, okay, which is, and that can be done by mail or in person, if you have a quorum, the homeowners at that quorum are entitled to decide issues.
And what is that quorum?
The quorum is the 20% that you're referring to.
That,
That is the default in our
you said
CCR.
earlier it was 51% was a quorum.
Let me clarify again. The 51% has to do with whether we change CC&Rs or not. Okay, as I tried to say earlier, we've got different rules for different things. Sustaining a civil action is 50% plus 1.
So you're acknowledging now that a
That
quorum
for
was
a-
20%.
Yes, for the things that aren't specified differently. That's what I was trying to say, that we've got rules that basically say a board quorum is 66%. Civil action requires 50% plus 1. Changing CC&Rs requires 51%. Okay? Voting on acquiring property doesn't say that it requires anything. We're trying to put something in there that says, yes, it does require.
And it requires only 20%.
It requires a majority of a quorum. That's the same thing that it takes
And
to.
that means 10% of the 10% of the property owners.
Fine, I mean, you know,
Plus 1.
that's why you get to vote on whether you think that's an adequate standard or not. Okay, you get to vote on that. That's what we're saying. It's a higher standard than is currently in place. We're requiring more votes go to homeowners than currently are required to go to homeowners. So, you know, if you don't want to do that, you can vote as you feel fit. But I mean, I think we've gone through this enough that we understand what the numbers are. So it's up to.
Move on to the next person.
Yes, please.
This is Ken Bradley. Going back to the $500,000 limit that the board has, that again does not require a vote of the homeowners, is that correct?
Under these changes,
Under the new
that's
changes.
correct, yeah.
Okay.
Under the current rules, there is no limit.
Okay, thank you.
Just to get back to that, you keep saying there's no vote required. The precedent in this state is usually any significant change to a community requires a vote, and it's 50 plus 1%. So any significant capital expense, any significant mortgage, any significant change in the character of the community. Now that's what the state is usually held as a precedent. And they usually require 50% plus 1 for almost all votes. So you're really dumbing down the vote. You're really reducing the vote. Okay, just a comment. That's my comment. That's a comment. I don't need a comment. I have a question on. You mentioned about the. You need a vote if you have exceed the normal assessment authority of the NRS 116. What section is that? That limits.
That's the 15%, which is in our CCRs by authority that's granted in NRS. Okay.
It's not in NRS 116. You keep
The authority
saying
for it to be in our CCRs is in NRS. Okay. Everything for our CCRs, whether we can do it or not, is in NRS. Okay. I do not know the section off the top of my head.
Well, you say the authority to increase such assessments
Excuse me.
that's detailed in the NRS 116.
Yeah, you've asked
So
me
I
a
could read, let me finish. I could read that as, there's no authority in NRS 116, so there's no limit on what I could raise it. Because NRS 116 supersedes the CC&Rs.
Okay, so your question is?
Where is it in the CC, in the NRS?
I don't know the numbers, I can't give you the number right now.
Well, this is an important change, why don't you know the details? I mean, I looked through there, I couldn't find it in the law. When you say something's in the law, it should be there.
Okay, you've made your question, let me make my answer, and then we'll move on, okay? To be clear, what I was trying to refer to is the 15%, which we put in our CC&Rs, which is allowed, we are allowed to put in our CC&Rs by NRS, otherwise we couldn't put it in our CC&Rs. That's what we're referring to, that 15%, which is the current standard. We're not changing, we're not giving the board any more authority than it already has. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, and 15% of a $4 million budget is $600,000, so that's a significant
The
amount.
board, all I'm saying is the board has that authority already.
Right.
So if you want to change that, we can change that, but that's not what we're doing here.
Well,
We're not giving the board any more authority, we're trying to be clear on when the board has to go to homeowner votes.
but you're giving the impression that if you exceed the authority, you have to go to vote. The barn door is so wide open that you're never going to exceed the authority.
Okay,
You're gonna-
the rules we set out at the beginning is after a question, we'll try to
Wait,
answer.
you've had the floor for an hour. I can at least have a couple questions.
No, you can't. Everybody gets to ask questions, and then we'll go back around.
After listening to everybody, it's obvious to me that if we had done what Charnel was suggesting, had a little more discussion, a lot of this could have been drowned out. That's it.
I have a simple question, Jeffrey Brooks. When the new agreement with the golf course comes up for a vote, what rules will that be done under? Would it be 50%? Will it be 50% plus 1, 51%, or 10% plus 1 vote?
The answer to that's going to depend on what the deal actually is, which we don't have right now. If I know, well, let me explain. If it depends, if it relates to purchase, lease, acquisition, annexation, these rules are going to apply.
Which ones?
Which ones? The ones we've been talking about here, the ones for purchase, lease, annexation.
Which is 30%. According to what he just said.
20%.
It's a quarter of 20%.
It's 50% plus 1%. That's major, major overfunding.
Join the board.
Good question, so I think very
Okay, well, Danielle raises a good point, that the agreement we have for this is if we make an agreement, we're obviously going to give that agreement to the Ombudsman's office and the Deputy AG that's representing them. So they're going to have to pass on whatever rules we propose. So they've got the authority to do whatever they want, I suppose. But right now, the rules are, right now, we don't have a clear rule on what it would take to have that vote. So that's what we're proposing here.
Yeah,
I'm not going to argue with you on whether you like them or not.
a simple solution, Tony. You did not define what a quorum was. You just, why didn't you just define what a quorum is in that article that you're adding? When you say a majority percentage of a quorum, which is, for the purposes of this type of stuff, 51%. That way there's no ambiguity, because I agree with what Mr. James said. There's nowhere else in the CC&Rs that define the quorum for this type of an action. And I also believe you're talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth when you say that, well, if we don't change it, the board has authority to buy all this stuff and do this anyway, whereas earlier you said one of the reasons why we want to modify the CC&Rs is such that we can do this. In fact, you have a section where you specifically state that, okay, this modification allows the board to lease, purchase, annex, blah, 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 which you said previously did not give you that authority.
No.
So I would ask the question, which is correct here?
I think you are confusing things, okay? And we've talked about a great many things. Okay? With regard to raising assessments and things like that, the board has already certain authorities. As I said at the beginning, with regard to property transactions, it is unclear the way our CC&Rs are written. That's what we're trying to clarify. As I said, there is an interpretation that said as long as we get the developer's approval, we can do this stuff. But we don't think we should have the developer involved. That's why we're trying to clarify exactly what we can do, or what any future board can do, and what any future board can't do. You know, if it was clear already, we wouldn't be here talking about modifying CC&R. So that's what we're trying to do, is to make that clear.
Dan, are you?
Yeah. I have a question coming back to that $500,000. The current lease agreement with Country Club has an option to buy the club for $1 under certain financial stress of the club. With these changes, the board would be in a position to buy the club for $1 with all the financial liabilities with it without any homeowner input. Is that correct?
No, I don't believe so, because what we're set for the standard in the wording here is fair market value. Okay, so whether we could buy it for $1 or not, I think it would be, you know, if that situation ever arose, which quite frankly, you know, I think a number of us, including some of the people here that I've spoken to recently, don't ever think that would actually come into play.
Well, I would argue that the fair market value of that option at the time the lease was signed was a negative little over $1 million, because that's what Bacon had to pay to have the club taken off his hands.
But again, going back to what we were talking about here, if we acquired 200 some odd acres of land, is anybody really going to argue that the fair market value of that is $1? I don't think so. It may be $1 as a golf course, but as land, it's worth a whole lot more than that.
If you have water rights.
That's right. Okay, well, Northgate, without water rights, sold for $2.4 million. Without water rights. Okay, that's what the combined price that the homeowners in the city paid, as I understand it. Okay, and that's, whoever that trust was, stripped out the assets.
No, that's wrong.
Is that wrong?
They were taken
They-
out long before.
The trust never gave the land with water rights. The city put water rights on it when it became a golf
Okay,
course in
but
1985.
But anyway, but
They
my
had
basic
no-
premise though was that it sold for $2.4 million without water rights, right?
Correct.
Right.
2.7. You're
2.7,
looking at about
okay.
12 and a half, $12,500 an acre.
Okay, so, you know, and if that's worth that, I can't see why ours would be worth less than that. And also, again, the annexation would be the fair market value, so we couldn't, if we bought it for $1, we couldn't annex it without a homeowner vote. And without annexing it, we can't really do anything with it. We can't really expend assessment money on things that aren't common area.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my ballot with me. Is this going to be you vote yes or no on everything, or is it, do you vote separately on 1, 2, 3, and 4?
No, for the purpose of the CC&R changes, it's either yes or no.
Okay.
So there, you know, if you vote yes, all of them will be implemented. If you vote no, none of them will be implemented.
I would just like to compliment you folks on what I believe is the intent and what you are trying to accomplish. As near as I can tell from being a long-term homeowner here in Somerset and seeing some of the conflicts that have come up regarding the country club agreement, it has struck me that getting the developer out of the affairs of Somerset in its entirety is perhaps the best thing that we could have happen. The second thing is that I understand, I believe that the intent of these CC&R changes is to actually make it more clear and more restrictive on what not this board, but all future boards are able to do. I think that given the complexity and the suggestions of hearing people be able to get some of these CC&R regs better clarified, you may want to consider having additional town halls to be able to address that.
Well, we've got another one scheduled next week, and we'll have more if people want more. And you know, we will look into some of the things that you raised, we'll have time before next week to talk to the attorney who drafted these, and we'll try to,
And my
provide more
last
information
comment,
every time.
the last comment I do want to make is that I really do appreciate what you folks are trying to accomplish. In the past, it's always seemed to be, and I sometimes sense this, that there's almost a feeling like the board is in opposition to the community. And yet this is our board. And the things that you're trying to do are for us. It's not for the developer. It's not for the golf course. It's for us as a community. And I would just hope that folks can go ahead and sense that this is the intent rather than projecting a lot of other things on it. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Ron Steele, and what this reminds me of is Nancy Pelosi, and you've got to pass the bill before you know what's in it. And if you don't understand that, then how about October the 1st and the website went down? It's been mentioned 3 times that you guys should have, you may be a wonderful idea, not arguing that point, but you should have presented it a hell of a lot more before I got it in my ballot last Friday. And I got, or whenever my ballot arrived, I found out about it, and then I got the boo-boos that was in the ballot, and you're trying to sell the Empire State Building. I'm saying is present, have many, many meetings, then send out. Why not take this and postpone it? You got a better chance. If my understanding is from what I read, you got to have that 50 plus 1. The way it's going, there's too many people that are going to go no. Thank you.
I think, let me just address that, because that comment's made several times. And I totally appreciate both the comment and I understand, what you're saying. Well, you've got part of the reasoning in retrospect, probably maybe not, the best way to do it, but this all did not, it wasn't like, when we came into the board in January 1st, we knew this was an issue. We didn't have any more clue than anybody out there had that this was an issue. Okay, this has come up over several things, and what we were trying to do was get it along with the homeowner vote to minimize the expense of the vote and also get the focus of having an election, because we think people pay attention to election. So that, if the time frame wasn't ideal, and I'm not justifying that, there aren't other ways to do this, or if it fails, we may have to do it again, and we can take a different approach. But just the realities of the timing was such, we were trying to minimize some of the costs and trying to get it out. And I totally understand what you guys are saying. It is what it is.
Yeah, I think this actually came up when we were trying to buy the lot, right? The attorney went through the paperwork and basically said, you guys don't have the authority to buy this lot.
It actually also came up with regard to the discussions we've had with the Ombudsman's office and the Deputy Attorney General with regard to the existing lease. And then we had some opinions that said, no, CC&Rs are fine. And then we started getting into it, and as we got into some of those issues, we realized that having multiple opinions that say different things by itself means it's not clear. And so we better do something to clarify it. So I mean, all this stuff kind of developed over the course of the year, and we were trying to get it in with the election material to do a single mailing. But again, I'm not going to sit here and say this is absolutely the perfect one to do. If people reject it, you've got that right to vote however you see fit. Hopefully you have at least understanding what our intent is with this. You can make your own judgments. We try to explain why we picked $500,000, how that kind of relates to what we see going around in terms of the lots here and stuff like that. You may think it's too high. Some people may think it's too low. But you get to vote what you want. Okay? If we don't have the authorities, then we've got even more confusion than we have now. So, that's what we're all trying to do, is get this discussion going and see if we can make some improvements.
Okay, I would just like to say I appreciate everything you guys do as a board. It's not an easy job. It's obviously not very thankful. My question is, if we can do that $500,000 limit, maybe what you guys should do is divide it by 5 and get paid for all the hard work that you guys do. Can we vote that maybe?
What do you know?
Since it is 7, I don't know if you want to formally close it down, or if you want to keep going, or have informal.
Shelley, how many people still have questions they want to ask? I would say let's, because I know other people have lots of things to do too. I'd say let's officially close it down. I'd be willing to stay and, answer questions. If anybody else is willing to stay and answer questions, we'll do that. How's that? That way, if you want to stay, you can. If you don't want to stay, feel free to leave. Let's just give people a few minutes to kind of sort out what they want to do. I think you were the first person who asked for a second comment or something, so we'll start with you.